Burgess here with Music Marketing TV. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a sound like this one. There's a bit of variation between the takes, and they can be quite significant, like that, versus. If you're listening over speakers, these are going to be harder to tell apart. But if you're listening over some nicer headphones, they'll be much easier to tell apart. There's just like subtle differences with how the phase starts up. It comes from the way the chorus does its job. I think I have a few theories, but I'm pretty sure it's just related to the chorus. So this is a bass line that I was going to try and make the bass line from Jim E-Stack. I'm not sure if it's pronounced Jimmy or Jim E-Stack. Note to self. This was a track I had a student who wanted me to make the bass line from, and that's what this actually is. It's being done with two Divas. I actually tried a lot of things. I tried a lot of different synths, a lot of different experiments, as you can see here. And at one point, I went down this very unusual path. And I was very convinced that it had to be one patch. And the more I listened to the original track, the more I realized there was a low pass saw wave in there. So you'll notice there's actually two bass lines. There's not just one. There's this low line that sort of follows the main line, which is this one right here. And this line ends up being important. It combines with the other sound in a way that adds to the final timbre. If I take this off. So that's the one patch. Then with the bass, here's just the bass line. And with these two things combined, they're both Diva. The Diva patches aren't all that complicated, I think, although they did take a ton of fiddling. And as you saw, there's still variation between each play. And it's mostly due to this chorus right here. And I have it in ensemble mode. And I am somewhat sure it's this. It might be the initial phase of the oscillators too. But that could be causing the variation. And so that's the most I could say about the variation. If anyone has a way of ironing that out, I'm all ears. And so this comes into the Diva bass. And in here, we've got an EQ that's got a rather aggressive high pass and a Maximus, which is pulling up the highs and the mids a touch. And that's literally all I touched in here. So these are very, very straightforward. And then on the output, I can't remember if I put a chain on this or not. I think I might have. Yeah, I've got an L2. There's an L2 here, pulling it up by about 5 dB. And that's because I was doing reference to the original track, which is going to have, a limiter on it. And it's a lot easier to do that if you have your own, a little mastering chain at the end. So just so you're aware, this is all on the patch as well. One more look at the EQ while you see it. Let's dive into the patches themselves and talk about how they work. So first off, the two lines of MIDI. So here's the first line of MIDI. It's just got this rising bass line, and it's responsible for the harmony that you hear. The first time I tried making this patch, I ended up trying to make it with two versions of this sound. This wah, wah, that sort of chorusy low pass saw wave thing. But this just doesn't lead you down the right path. Interestingly, there is someone else on YouTube that has a video, but it's unlisted. You have to get to it through a Reddit post. They actually went down a very similar path that I did, which I thought was pretty crazy because we were both thinking the same thing, some kind of modulation. They went down FM. I experimented with AM. But it wound up not being either of those. And I was convinced the more I listened to it and just, when you're producing, I was like, I don't think it's got to be one patch. And the more I listened, the more I began to realize after looking at it through a spectrogram, it's like, I'm pretty sure there's a saw wave in there that's actually responsible for most of the harmony. And sure enough, yeah, it is. Once you hear it, it's obvious. But if you're just listening to the bass by itself, it's kind of hidden in the original sound. So anyways, there's this bass line here. It plays slightly different things. And the reason I suspected this was because some parts had a major third and some parts had a minor third. So that means that it couldn't be some sort of a ratio of an offset of two things, because then it would be constant the whole time. It would be always minor third, or always major third, but instead this thing changed. And so that's what this is doing. And it also just sort of melds into the other one since they're both saw waves. So there's a phasiness relationship between the two. So that could also be a source of the variation between plays. But anyways, that's what's coming in. So this is the sound it has. This is the MIDI it wound up being. So the glide is very short. It's monophonic. So if we just take a look at this here, it's just a default patch. And then I brought down the cutoff some ways. You could see the ADSR envelope. For all these, I went with the triple VCO as the oscillator source and kept everything pretty much like the default you would see. The glide time you can see here is been brought down to 0, and we're in the mode of monophonic. This is in the main tab. I didn't touch any of the other tabs. I didn't need to. And then on the output of this thing, while it is just a saw wave, I do have a chorus. It's on the type dramatic. There's 3 types, and dramatic was the one that I decided for this. Dramatic and ensemble are quite a bit more like blurry, I guess is a way to say it, than classic. Classic, you kind of hear like a phasey movement through it, like a little more clearly. But these two are different. I think there must be some randomization. I haven't looked in the manual, but the manual probably details it. But anyways, I decided on dramatic just by ear. Rate is very low, but the depth is rather high, and it's 100% wet. So that's an important note that this is on there. It's what causes some of this variation. And if you look here, there's some movement that happens, and that movement is important in the original timbre to get it just right. And then I also have a plate on. Again, mostly wet, but the decay is extremely short. These are the 2 most important properties. Damping can also be somewhat important, and the size has to be kind of small. The dry, so it's like dry and wet is both brought up, but the wet being as high as it is pretty dang high for a verb. But it's important for just the layering effect. So these are the 2, I think the 2 key aspects that sort of give the bass its sound, along with just picking the correct filter cutoff for that. I did go with the 24 dB filter here. And without it, it'll just be more shallow. But I was again comparing to a reference, and theirs cut off around 2K. So that's where I decided to cut mine off. So anyways, just so you know, some of this was a little bit visually decided at first, because my first few attempts just by ear led me down some paths that I was just sure weren't right. And so I let my eyes guide me a little bit more on this one. And once I had that, my ears could do a better job from there. So anyways, that's the low layer patch. Pretty straightforward patch. Nothing too crazy. And that is coming into channel 9. So channel 9 is this one right here. So I did have an ensemble on here, but I wound up taking it off. It goes through this EQ, which just has a gentle high pass. So there's not very much going on down here. It's just a shelving filter, I think. Yeah, it's just a shelving filter and a brief peaking filter. And some of this was ear, and some of this was guided by trying to match the exact brightness of the harmonics in a spectrogram. So anyways, that's what was here. So this one was a somewhat surgical one where I was using spectrograms a little heavily to guide my decision-making process after I went at it pretty hard with my ears. And so for this other patch, this is the one that I was going after with the ear. That is layer 1. So layer 1's here. These other layers are just like failed attempts. So you can just ignore all those. We just care about this top layer. So this is layer 1. So on this one, there's a glide. The glide time, it's somewhere in this neighborhood. I think I settled on 40. If we move it, we can see. Oh, I settled on like 41.5 or something. Somewhere around there, though. That's around the glide. You can mess with this on your own. It's just a glide time. The mode is legato. So notes need to be overlapping in order for them to fire correctly. These are the notes. So this is what it looks like. There's an octave jump here at the beginning. So to get that initial glide, you need to have the note a little ways off. That way it hits down here and then glides up to this one. So just be aware of that. That's an important takeaway. Everything else is pretty much standard gliding. This high note being not filtered is important. So what I mean by that is we have a filter set off here, but I have the keyboard tracking turned on. It's not quite at 100. Is it at 100? No, it's not quite at 100. It's just below like 90 or something like that. 86.5 apparently. And this is important. It lets the filter follow where it goes. So when you play high notes, they're still there with their timbre, but they still have the like almost the appearance of being filtered off on the high end because the very high parts are not being filtered, or they are being filtered, but like the fundamentals and stuff still survive to some extent. So this is just keyboard tracking. Filter follows the cutoff. It's kind of a standard thing. This is so you get those timbres there. For the waveforms coming in, this is what we got. We got two inputs, oscillator 1, oscillator 2, no feedback, no noise. They're both being set at the 8 range here. And I can't remember which one's on and off anymore. That's off. This is on. So these are but this is, I believe, yeah, this is the sync. These, I believe, became less important as I went further in, so I'm just going to kind of ignore these. Waveform-wise, we're dealing with 2 sawtooths. I did experiment with reverse saws, and those can produce similar results. Reverse saws give just different phasey patterns in general, and if you have something that's like modulation shape-driven, these become more significant. But I wound up leaving all that kind of stuff behind for just 2 standard saw waves. Because if you look at the original, it's a saw wave pattern. Like I could get the harmonics to line up exactly. So I knew I had the right core as a starting point. But the thing is, there was some shakiness going on in the spectrogram, and that's, got to be some sort of modulation. In this case, it was a chorus. So no reverb on this, just a chorus. Chorus is in ensemble. This gives it a lot more of a blurry effect, and it's not so obvious that it's a chorus. Sometimes they can give the appearance of amplitude modulation, which was actually my first attempt at doing things. Setting like the oscillator 1 and 2 at a ratio, but wound up not being that. So anyways, set this up. So we've talked about the filter. We've talked about these things. The attack, this is just like fast attack. Keep the sustain up. Nothing shocking there. And then over here, yeah, this is like the move that's like going to be kind of a tricky one because it's so simple and small, but if you don't have like the exact right values, it just doesn't hit right. So chorus 1, ensemble, and these are the settings that I've wound up on by ear. After this though, if we take off the EQ and the Maximus, this is what it sounds like. We get a low harmonic showing up, and these are all just boosted like way too much. So we immediately shave some of that off. Much cleaner sound, and if you play through it, you can hear there's the variations in this. That's the one I want, this specific variation. It comes up often enough that I could just record through when I play it until I get the one that I want and keep that as like an audio file, which is how I would kind of have to work with this if I want to get very close to the original. See, like that's really far off, but it's literally the same process. So it's kind of an interesting deal. I was looking for ways to phase lock things, which is why I was fiddling with sync options up here. But I think some of it has to do with whatever this chorus is doing. So I fall short on knowledge a little bit there. So if anyone knows of a way to get even more locked in so it's more consistent, I would love to know. And then we have here a Maximus. So the Maximus here, it just pulls up the mids and highs. That's literally all it does. Don't chalk it up to anything more crazy than that. It's what I think of when I'm grabbing it, when I'm just touching this. So I literally just clicked on these two and pulled them up. That was it. Highs more so. See on that one how light that harmonic is? But anyways, yeah, the whole point of this move is to try and brighten up this stuff up here so that it's got a little bit stronger of a presence. In the original, it was like that. So when you put these two things together and run them through a limiter, and the whole point of the limiter is just to sort of jazz it up to 11 so we can get a vibe for what's going on here. In this case, it's sitting on the bus right here, and it sounds like this. This is what it looks like. Without it, it's just softer. That's all. If you're referencing to a track, like I have here the MIDI and the thing being played at the same time, but I'm not going to play it for like copyright reasons. It fits so well at this point that I swear it's in the original. And sometimes, on some of these repetitions, I swear I've gotten like so close. I guess the original sound was made using a sub 37, a Moog. So, anyways, Fun fact. According to Reddit, that some people on Reddit say that's what it was. It was a preset on there, I guess. I don't have a lot of experience with the hardware version of this. Anyways, putting them together, you get this. Yeah, this high note, the timbre right there is kind of like nailing that is a bit, is like pretty tricky. But anyways, that's the patch. I've spent way more time than I ever thought I would trying to make this patch, but there it is. If you have any questions about it, feel free to let me know. Subscribe and hit that bell icon for future videos, and have a blessed day.